And we are live. Good morning. Today we have John Ellis Bush, better known as Jeb Bush, born in Midland, Texas. Governor Bush was elected as the 43rd governor of Florida and was the first Republican to be reelected in Florida's history. During his time as governor between 1999 and 2007, he arguably developed the most comprehensive set of school reforms that took Florida from being an educational laggard to being a national leader. Among those reforms, he eliminated social promotion, increased the exit exam requirements for high school graduation, raised standards for school performance, made reading instruction a primary focus in the early grades and for middle schools. And the data point that every time that I have to talk about Governor Bush in any capacity that I remember from a speech that he gave more than a decade ago, that when he came to Minnesota, is that Black and brown children in Florida had a 300% increase in the number of them not just taking AP exams, but passing AP exams, which is a data point that stuck out in my head, and I've remembered it for 10 years, specifically because at the time we were only concerned about getting our students to take those exams, not also to pass them. And that to me stood out. 300% increase is something that should be a bragging right. Today, Governor Bush is the founder, president, and chairman of the board of directors for the Foundation for Excellence in Education. Good morning, Governor Bush. Thank you for joining.
It is a joy to be with you. I hope you're safe up there in Minnesota. We're doing quite well here in Miami, and look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, well, we are doing safe as can it be expected. We're blessed as a family in general, but as Minnesotans go, we're facing the same thing that everybody else in the country is facing, which is trying to figure out what we do in the middle of an emergency to make things feel normal for parents and students. And it's not working 100%. But, at the start, I just want to say at the top, one of your key characteristics, the Governor Bush key characteristic is optimism. I would term it tough optimism, but that's your key characteristic. So give us hope right now. What are you seeing in education that's keeping you inspired and hopeful during a very tough time?
Definitely rising to the occasion. A lot of charter school organizations are figuring out ways to make sure that their children get a quality education online or in a hybrid format. A lot of school districts are doing the same. I'm proud that my home school district, Miami-Dade, basically prior to the pandemic had already trained for online education because we have hurricanes here. And so all of that all those learnings that took place in the previous years came to real benefit for the students. So there's a lot of good news out there. There's also a lot of pessimistic views. My attitude about this is that we should default to action. There should be a bias to act. We should embrace creativity and innovation in this moment. It is shameful, I think, in our country, an incredibly prosperous country, that so many young people, particularly low-income students, don't have access to a device or don't have access to broadband, to the internet, to be able to do online learning. And so you're going to see big drops in learning in places like Chicago and other places where the school districts haven't responded to the challenge. And so I think it's incumbent upon people that believe that every child can learn, that God's given them that ability, that we really make a concerted effort to make sure that there's access to a quality education, even in the times of a pandemic.
The broadband issue that you just mentioned seems old. It seems like an old issue that's been with us, 20, I want to say 30 years, but probably not. I don't know. We've had internet that long, but what do you think right now the clever governor or the clever national leader would do to tap private industry to help fix that fast, something that's been a problem for a long time?
Well, there's all sorts of things I think we could do. First of all, eventually there's going to be more stimulus that will provide support for schools and local and state governments. Pretty certain that's going to happen. There ought to be some investments in digital infrastructure. That could be the catalyst for philanthropy, for businesses, in this moment of real strife and racial tensions, I'm seeing businesses across the country responding in very productive ways to provide access to jobs and access to education. There's been a lot of movement towards dealing with these equity issues, and this is perhaps the biggest equity issue we face. So our foundation is working hard to develop a strategy that would be bottom up, but we're hopeful that there's going to be federal money that would be the jumpstart for eliminating the digital divide. The thing that the thing that could be done first and foremost is to use some of the discretionary money in the previous stimulus by given to commissioners of education and to governors to be able to purchase devices, so that starting in August, right now, when schools do open, that and kids are learning online, that they have access to access to homework, access to the work. Teachers, there's 400,000 teachers in this country that don't have access to the internet. How are they going to teach remotely if they don't even have access to the internet? So a lot of things can happen at the local and state level, and the federal responsibility, I think, would be to provide a significant amount of money and create a strategy of leveraging that money with philanthropy and private sector support.
You know, you just mentioned the leaders, the federal government. You have also said, I think recently even, that we shouldn't over rely on Washington. We shouldn't look to Washington for all of our answers. But when I heard that, you also have said in the past that as a leader, you need to go big or go home in education. So if I'm leading the nation right now and I want to show the world like strength, the United States is a strong country that can meet any challenge. And I want to go big, from Washington. What do I do right now? Like, what's the play?
I think the play isn't to say to a school district, you have to open, or we're going to withhold money. That's a strategy based on weakness, basically, and confrontation. What we ought to say is we have an aspiration to make sure that every student has the access to learning via the internet and has a device sturdy enough to be able to help them learn. And that can be done not by doesn't have to be implemented nationally, but if there's funding and you create a certain set of guidelines, there will be all sorts of options that will help deal with this issue. We have to deal with it. I just think right now everything is politicized. Everything turns into a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. This is not a hyper-partisan issue. This is a great nation should have the access. Every person in our country should have access to a quality education. And now it's clear that the digital environment is going to be an integral part of that going forward, which could be a great thing. If you think about it, assume we'll get through the pandemic. Having access to quality content at home could make it possible to move to what I think ultimately needs to be the goal, which is competency-based, mastery-based learning, where students learn at their own pace, in their own way, and eventually we don't have these big, huge gaps in learning, where you have kids graduating from high school with 8th grade level reading, and we have kids that are being kind of held back rather than being able to pursue higher order work. 25% of all juniors in high school are capable of taking college level work, but we have about 5% or 4% that actually do it. So moving to that model where the home is also a place where learning takes place, where students are more responsible for their work and teachers become mentors and helping guide that work, is something ultimately that could be a huge benefit for our country. So dealing with the digital divide in a pandemic is a short-term challenge that we need to do something on, but it does have the benefit of having a long-lasting potential benefit for our country.
Do you think that leaders can still have a long view right now? I mean, you were governor through hurricanes, and after a hurricane, your main goal is just to get the roofs back on houses and just to get the water drained. But you're not thinking long term about how you keep CTE innovating and how you keep workforce development programs in schools, or how you do innovative things around testing or whatever. You're really just thinking about getting the roof back on houses. Can you take a long view as a leader right now?
Yeah, I think you can. I think you can take advantage of this opportunity to make long-lasting investments in the things that we need. Look, the first thing we need are leaders at every level that have, in this particular challenge and crisis that we're facing, have enough humility to know what you don't know. Everybody's got an opinion on stuff. Maybe what we ought to do is say, here's my strategy. My strategy is to have a bias towards action, that we're going to get through this. We're going to do it together. This is going to be a tough climb. And if there's challenges that we didn't identify, we're going to adapt a new strategy to deal with that. But at the end of this struggle, there's a lush green valley on the other side of the hill. We need to be having people be fact-driven, science-driven, and then having a strategy based on humility that we don't have every answer, that as we see new facts on the ground, that we adapt as we go along. And then we have to offer hope. That, I think, is what's missing right now. In lieu of that, what we have are political fights. And I don't think most people really don't want to turn this into a hyper-partisan deal. Most people realize that we all have a responsibility to socially distance, to clean our hands, to wear a mask, to take care of our loved ones, to love them with their heart and soul. And times, it's really hard right now. My daughter-in-law is having a baby in 2 weeks. And, we don't get to see our granddaughters like we used to the same extent. I worry about, I have friends who can't see their parents, who, are isolated. I know a lot of people that lost their jobs. This is a really tough time, and we should put a pause on the political button and focus on the broader, bigger things that unite us.
What's hard for me right now as an American citizen, as a voter, as somebody who pays attention to what leaders do and say, there seems to be a deficit of the rhetoric of hope. There seems to be an absence of that sunny leadership. What you just said, there's a lush green, I don't know how you just put it, but on the other side of the hill or, whatnot, is what's missing. It's that type of moral, rhetorical leadership that gives people a picture of, we will make it through this.
And hold up high the examples of heroic efforts that are taking place in every community in this country. There are teachers that are innovating in spectacular ways. The frontline workers in hospitals and nursing homes have done heroic work. There are nurses that travel from New York down to Florida, down to back to Phoenix. They're doing this because they view this as an important part of who they are. We should pause and reflect on the fact that they're the ones that should be held up high as examples of what we all can do. There are great examples of businesses that didn't shut down, even though their revenue was totally dried up. This is a time, I think, to be honest about the situation, because it is a grave time for our country, but also realize that we can get through it. The other thing I'd say is, there are huge challenges coming up that will require national leadership. Let's assume we get a vaccine, which ultimately will allow us to go back to some degree of normalcy for sure. Who's going to get the vaccines first? How do you prioritize that? Do we have the equipment necessary to make the vaccines? Do we have a strategy to be able to roll this out very quickly? Those things, are going to be really important, and I'm sure we don't hear much about that because everything, as I said, is hyper-partisan right now. But my guess is that people are working on that, and we should know about it because that would give us hope as well. That
something's come down the pipe, that we have something coming. One of your chief strategies has always been bipartisanship. So I think if there's another characteristic besides optimism in your playbook, it's always been working with somebody who across difference politically. Sounds like a tough call right now. If you were to have to put together a blue ribbon council of leaders who were going to come together as leaders and meet our national challenge together, and we're going to do something like America has done, like the Marshall Plan, or I don't know, just something big, but they were going to do it in a apolitical, nonpartisan way. Could you put together that council? Could you think of national leaders who are mature enough right now to make that happen?
Of course. Just think of my dad and Bill Clinton dealing with Katrina and the tsunami. My brother and Barack Obama could lead the charge to deal with the digital divide. There would be an outpouring of support for across every sector of our society for something like that. There's a yearning for it. Look, I'm a conservative and I don't agree with the progressive agenda. I don't think they're bad people or anything just because we have a difference of opinion. But on the things that we can agree on, let's don't fight about them. Let's figure out ways to solve it. That's the attitude I think we need to get to. There will be another day to fight over the size and scope of government, the level of taxations, how much regulation should come from the federal government. All those are legitimate arguments that we need to have. Those things are proper to have conversations about in our political system. But right now, even when we agree, we can't agree, and that's dangerous.
You know, what's interesting about the names that you just mentioned, they're people that have stature and credibility in the public, but are no longer in office. And it feels like if you're in office right now, there is no such thing as a center. It seems like the thing in your lifetime, you've probably witnessed centrists evaporate, and it doesn't pay anymore.
The core has hollowed out for sure. The rewards politically are to push people away from one another, to push people down to make yourself look better. Part of that is just the changing culture. Part of it is the internet. You can create. Right now, we've siloed our lives in so many ways, and the vertical thing, the horizontal things that where we have a broad interest in a lot of different things has been tattered at the seams, and the things that we all we end up self-sorting towards the things that we can agree on. So I think many people are more righteous about their beliefs because their beliefs are validated by what they consume in terms of news, what they read, who their friends are on Facebook, and the things that used to tie us together, the set of common objectives, the common identity that who we are as Americans, all of that is eroded a lot. So restoring that, I think, will restore our political system as well.
Do you think we have to wait until after the election?
Yeah,
I mean, everything is up for grabs until the election happens, right?
Chris, I don't think this election is going to be a lush green valley on the other side of the rocky climb. I don't think that's going to be the case. There's an expression in North Florida: it's going to be butt ugly. I mean, it's not going to be pretty.
You know, in a time like this, there's a lot of attention on the positive news about parents forming things like pods and creating their own innovative solutions are mostly geared towards slice of life stories for middle class parents and upper middle class parents with resources. The achievement gap talk for parents of low income is mostly negative around we're going to fall behind, we're going to have a COVID slide. Whole districts are probably going to lose track of students and groups of students, especially homeless students in foster care. I think the last time you and I talked, I pitched the idea that we should be watching out for a data vacation. States are going to want to not have any data for the next year or two, and who that's going to hurt. I have a couple of questions around that, but the first one really is starting with, the data vacation. I asked Arne Duncan, former education secretary, Arne Duncan, when we talked about the data vacation. He's like, this is not a time to pump the brakes on having assessments and understanding where our kids are. At your level, what would you be saying if your state's teachers unions and others were pushing you as a governor to take a data vacation right now? How would you handle that? What would be your response?
I'd say you're going to have to come through me. It's not going to happen. This would be if we eliminate the end of year tests for 2 years in a row. Accountability in the states that do that will be altered dramatically, and hard to imagine how it comes back from that. So I agree with Secretary Duncan. We have to get back to, again, the dual position. The bias ought to be towards action. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Hurricane Charlie hit Southwest Florida in August 13th, 2004. It was a Cat 4 storm. It was brutal. And flew all the way through the state from Southwest Florida all the way up to Daytona Beach, basically that corridor. It was still a hurricane when it left into the Atlantic. The devastation was amazing. And the schools, there was one whole school, high school, there was 2 high schools in Charlotte County. One was damaged, the other was wiped out. And so it took them, gosh, a month before they got back to school. And they did, but instead of saying, oh, we can't do this, Charlotte County said, we're going to take the one high school that was damaged, fix it, and have 2 high schools basically habitated for, from 7 in the morning till 1 in the afternoon, and then 1 to 6 in the afternoon, something like that. 7, morning shift and a day shift. And then the calls by the unions and others was, well, we shouldn't administer the end of year exam, which is the integral part of our accountability system where we grade schools A through F. And I said, no, we're going to have the test, and kids are going to rise to the challenge, and teachers will as well. The net effect was the districts that were most impacted by the storms, because we had 4 hurricanes that year, did the best. Kids rise to the challenge if you have high expectations for them. Teachers rise to the challenge. But if you set a low bar, or basically no bar at all, you're going to get a bad result. You're going to get a horrible result. And it won't be the pandemic pod parents that, they'll figure out ways to make sure their kids learn. But it'll be the unemployed mom who has a child who doesn't have the resources to be able to provide the extra work necessary to overcome a school district that has a bias towards inaction. And so this is a huge challenge for our country right now. And the unions, I think, should put aside some of their the issues of eliminating accountability and focus on how do we make sure that we all rise to the challenge.
The unions, as you mentioned, are having to think about their strategy right now for how they address this with their members. There's a New York Times article recently about them wanting to have it both ways. They want to fight to keep schools closed for longer. They want to limit the amount of teaching that they're required to do at the same time. And at the same time, they are fighting, in some places, fighting choice, fighting like the Los Angeles Teachers Union has it right there in their demands for coming back to school, that they want charter schools to be halt on testing in charter schools as a demand to come back to teach. Do you think that this is going to become a time where governors are finally going to have a tough conversation with unions that they've never had before and say, you're not going to win this time? This is something you can't win on.
Yes, I think not just state leaders, but parents are going to be disgusted by that kind of attitude. Look, there's pretty good evidence that elementary schools should be open, that the infection rates among young children is very low, and their transmission rates are also low. Do we have to have social distancing? Does there have to be strategies to make sure that kids are not in harm's way, and the teachers and the workers in the schools are protected? Of course, we need to have those strategies. But man, if we basically lock down for the fall semester, the social cost of quarantining in place for another 3 or 4 or 5 months is devastating. We're already seeing increases in domestic violence. There's anecdotal evidence that alcoholism and drug abuse, in fact, drug overdoses are up. There's significant issues of not being able to work that have big ramifications as it relates to health and safety of children. And so I think, as I said, the bias ought to be to open, and at a minimum, it ought to be elementary schools. And then, there's other creative ways of dealing with this. You could go to a hybrid model where you shrink the number of students in half and have Monday, Wednesday, Friday for one group, and then Tuesday, Thursday for that group the next week. There's ways to make sure that, look, we have a lot of unemployed kids. There's kids there's seniors in college that may not be able to go back. Why not hire them, put them in the classroom, to be able to team up with a professional teacher that may be zooming in from her home rather than being in the classroom because she may have a pre-existing condition. Listening to parents is the first step of this. And if the unions don't want to listen to the needs of parents, politically, they're going to be in a heap of trouble.
Mm-hmm. You know, you've mentioned parents a couple of times. Of course, that's something that I think about the most as a parent and someone who only does the work that I do as a parent activist. That's actually the way I identify. You know, some of our internal activists at Brightbeam are starting to raise the questions around what families are going to do for resources. Families that don't have the resources to do educational pods or educational collaboratives or these fancy things that folks are doing, and the schools aren't returning in full. I know Senator Rand Paul has proposed legislation about giving resources directly to parents. I know the Department of Education has thought about this. Would you be supportive of a direct transfer of the per pupil allocation that comes with kids to become a direct subsidy, educational subsidy to parents or families directly?
I would. In the cases where the districts themselves, you know, there was a school district, I think it was, I better not say because I think it was Berkeley, but there was a school district out west that said, we're not going to provide online learning because we can't be convinced that everybody can access it. So if everybody can't, you know, if 100%, we don't have 100% access, then we're not going to do it for anybody.
Yeah.
That, you know, in that place, how are parents supposed to focus on this? What are they going to do? Of course, there should be direct support for parents that want to make sure their kids don't lag behind. It's complicated for sure, but there are ways to, and I would add, by the way, private schools as well. I know that's supposed to be controversial, but education is about educating students, not the delivery systems per se. So charters, there's all sorts of other options in the traditional public schools, and we should provide support for all of them. You know, in Florida, we have a very robust voucher program, corporate tax scholarship program. Well, there's not a lot of corporate taxes to give credits on right now. And a lot of parents, you know, a lot of private schools across the country are closing. That's going to create more stress for our public K-12 systems across the country. So supporting parents and supporting across the board, supporting schools to be able to make sure they continue their mission is really important.
You know, is that a weakness of tax scholarships or tax credits? Is that, you know, in times where you have downturn, that they're dependent on corporate taxes? I mean, should it be the straight up funding? Shouldn't you just get the money?
Well, in the case of Florida, there was the argument was that this was a more constitutional means of providing this service, that it was not directly out of the coffers of the government. So therefore, the Blaine Amendment, which is no longer, you know, relevant, and state constitutional issues could be avoided, a challenge. But the fact is now our Supreme Court at the state level has been really supportive of these efforts that Governor DeSantis and Governor Scott have implemented. So, yeah, I mean, I think there should be direct support. And there is in Florida. We have education savings accounts that provide that directly for parents, and they make the informed choice. And I think students do a lot better when their parents are completely engaged. So I love the idea that in your school district of that the school district is basically doing, you know, calling every parent to find out what they want to do. Do they want a hybrid? Do they want to be at home? Do they want their kid to be at school? That's powerful, and I think all school districts ought to do that.
You know, the one thing they're not doing for sure is asking us, hey, if we gave you your full per pupil revenue for your 3 kids to do whatever you want to do for them, because I've calculated it, that would be, you know, close to 52K for my 3 kids. And I could hire a whole teacher. I've been saying that to folks recently. I could hire a whole teacher if you were to just give me the per pupil. And that would be the best situation, because that would be a teacher that had a class size of 3. Which, you know, probably would be optimal for any teacher. So no one's really talking about giving us the full per pupil allotment. And I do think as a leader, as a state leader, there's what I want as a parent, but the real rub is then you're going to have superintendents coming to you from the state. You're going to have school boards coming to you and others coming to you to say, if you do this, you're really going to be ruining the infrastructure, the public school infrastructure, by doing that.
Look, it's public schools are going to be around forever. In Florida, we have the most ambitious private school. Our charter schools are robust. We have a large number of them. We have a large number of private schools that participate in a variety of different voucher-like programs. But 85% of all students go to K-12 public schools, or maybe actually less than that if you count exclude charter. So it's still a majority, and it will be a majority. And there's an important role to play for public schools. But public schools get better when parents can make informed choices about where their kids go to school. That's the lesson of Florida. All schools get better when parents are empowered to make more choices. And it's not just an opinion, I do believe that, and that's my opinion, but it's also based on a lot of serious research done by researchers across the country, because we do have a treasure trove of data in Florida. From 1998 on, we've been accumulating probably the best amount of data of any state. So you can track the success of public schools and private schools and parents, satisfaction pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Did you guys do anything in Florida to that word you said, informed choice, when parents can make an informed choice? Did you put any type of resources into helping parents understand what the information was telling them?
Not enough. I think that's a place where our state and other states need to do a better job. There's ways to do this, I think. Now, if you think about artificial intelligence, let's assume that the perfect system would be that you have an end of year exam that measures how you've done during that year. That test ought to be given to the teacher. It ought to be diagnostic as well. It ought to be given to the outgoing teacher, the incoming teacher, and the parent, so that in the summer you have, and in a clear, easy to understand way, where mom and dad know, here's where your kids is soaring in reading and math, and here's where they need work, and here are the resources available to you to be able to make sure this summer that they hit the ground running by doing some work in the summer, so there's not atrophy, and that they start in August or September ready to go. That kind of information, and then the measurement of schools. The one thing we did that was the first of its kind was we graded schools A through F. So that was, pretty easy to understand. An F wasn't as good as an A.
Yeah, I imagine that was controversy free.
Well, no, it wasn't. And I did one thing because of just, I'm pretty passionate about these things, and we ended up retroactively grading schools so that we had a base from which to measure schools. And then the way the system worked, if you were F 2 years in a row, parents could choose a higher performing public school or a private school. And that was the first statewide voucher program in the country. And that was controversial, still is today. The good news is that now there's a constituency of informed parents that are very happy with sending their kids to a private school that best meets their needs. One of the things where there's been less controversy is kids that parents who have an IEP for their child, an individual education plan protected by federal law. They normally fight it out with the school district, right? And the thing gets lawyered up, and the IEP can become a place of contention. In Florida, if your IEP is not being met, if a parent believes the child's not getting the education they need, there's no argument. They can take state and local dollars and go to a private option. And there are about 35,000 kids that are going on what are called McKay scholarships to private schools. That kind of approach, where parents don't have to hire a lawyer, where they're empowered with the money to make that choice, has improved public education for kids with learning disabilities. Florida's in the top 5 normally on the NAEP test as it relates to kids with exceptional needs.
Right now, the special education parents are ones that I think often are not feeling as heard as they should be right now. And the way that districts are handling this, the Center for, I think, SERPI, yeah, for rethinking education, public education. Robin Lake is going to kill me because I'm butchering the name of their organization. She's a friend, and she's going to kill me. But Robin Lake, her group there in Washington, I think were the first ones to look into what districts and states were going to do around special education. And many districts and states were using special education parents and students as a scapegoat to say, because we can't do anything for them, we're not going to do anything for anybody. Like we can't do distance learning for IEPs and whatnot. What's, you just gave somewhat of a touch on special education. Is there anything else you think right now leaders should be doing to be thinking innovative around in ways to innovate education for special education parents?
It's a real challenge. I think that every effort ought to be made to create in-school learning that is safe, where teachers and adults in the schools are protected, and where students can learn. It's hard to imagine how hard it's going to be for parents that are struggling economically, that have a child with special needs. It's much harder to do that virtually. I'm sure there are great examples of schools that have done this. There are many schools that easily went online and made it a mission to make sure that every child was contacted, that they knew how much online learning was actually taking place, that there was an assessment every day of, if you didn't have, like in South Carolina, there's buses that had Wi-Fi that would travel into communities where the Wi-Fi penetration was really low, to make sure that students and teachers would be on the bus to make sure that there was help. This is, there's a lot of creative solutions to these things. And the bias needs to be to act rather than to say we can't do it. What I feel like, and I get so frustrated with this. I feel like we need John Belushi in Animal House to give a speech about the Germans in Pearl Harbor.
I think, when we cut up this interview, we're going to cut that in to this interview later. And John Belushi says right now, I think one of the things that's really hard right now, and maybe you can help with this, is this balance between state and federal. There's an inclination right now is you want somebody to swoop in and just be the leader that you always wanted. You want government to do big things right now. You want the feds to show the world that, that we really can do big things and that we can meet a challenge like this. And so that no one doubts us in the future. I read something recently that was very concerning to me, which is that for a long time, people had been wondering what could ruin America's reputation for being solid, for being steel in every situation. And a biological pandemic that shuts the economy down, shuts schools and all that just might be it, and might embolden other countries to see us not as fully strong and capable right now. But we have this deal that we don't want the feds jumping in on everything. We don't want them to take over and just lead. How do we balance that tension between wanting the feds and the president and others to just make a very solid stand and say, we're going to marshal all of our resources and we're going to do something big, versus, no, it should be local control. It should be school districts and states. What's the balance?
I think the balance is that this is as it relates to opening schools or finding a vaccine or making sure that there's equipment for frontline workers, all of that, this is a national priority. It doesn't have to be delivered by the federal government. There's a difference. I think the idea of a Katrina-like response where you mobilize the big and caring hearts all across the country is a national effort, but it could be delivered locally. Governors play an important role in all this. I have a bias towards governors just because I got to do it for 8 years. But look, in a position like this, a public leader needs to accept personal responsibility. They have to. You have to give people a sense that you have their back, that it's not about you, that if there's a problem, you're going to fix it. and you're going to be truthful about what the situation is on the ground. That's not happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. It's don't need to get into the politics of the moment, but it can't be about the leader. It has to be about the cause. And I do think our reputation has been damaged as a country. I mean, the things that we've have generally relied on, pandemic response in previous pandemics had been in, Ebola and other places. We led the world, and now we're having a hard time. The CDC couldn't figure out how to do a test, which created, stalled precious time to be able to contain the virus. We ran out of all sorts of protective gear. Now there's concern about, do we have the ingredients necessary to manufacture the vaccine if one is available? I hope there is. I mean, there's not a lot of conversation about that. It seems like we're not hitting it on all cylinders right now.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like we're showing this to the world.
Yeah.
Which is the fear that I'm raising, is that I don't believe that the world has ever doubted the power and the strength of the United States. Ever. I think that they've always respected it. Love America or hate America, they always had to respect it. And it feels like this weird, unsettling time of showing the world something they've never seen before, which is a little bit of weakness. I don't think we need to get into the politics of the day at that level, but are you having any interaction with education leaders or thinkers in other countries where you're seeing things that we could take away from them?
Yeah, I mean, we've been following through the foundation the work of other countries for sure. Sweden never closed their schools. Most of and what they found, the good news is what they found was that particularly the elementary level, there was very little outbreaks of infection, and they developed strategies to keep the kids safe. Now, there's all sorts of uncertainty about how the virus spreads, but it does appear, based on now we have millions of cases, right? And we have sadly thousands of deaths. We can follow this and track it globally, and that information is really valuable for the country as we figure out what to do over the next couple of months. So Europe is Netherlands has operated well. Denmark has done as well. Sweden was an outlier as it related to shutting down. They didn't shut down to the extent that the rest of the world did, but their schools have not been a problem.
What are you thinking about the real hard?
The other thing I'd say about this is that there has to be a sense of personal responsibility in this. I mean, I get up early and walk now before I go to work. And yesterday I was walking down this street, and this guy had painted all over his windows. Hopefully he could remove it. Shamdemic. That's what he had. Oh. He felt so compelled to say that this was a sham, that he's driving around the neighborhoods expressing his view. It's not this is a pandemic. It's real. And we all have a personal responsibility to wear a mask and to socially distance and to take care of our families, and not to I mean, it's disturbing to me that 300,000 people or 250,000 people showed up in South Dakota for, their the festival for the bikers. It's great. It's a great thing for the South Dakota economy, but just at least the pictures I saw, people weren't wearing masks. And my guess is the infections will spread from that to other places in the country. We need to take more responsibility. And I think many of the countries that have been successful, they're not just depending on their government to do this. They're also culturally, they're more in tune to do the right thing for themselves and the people they care for.
Well, I mean, I didn't mean to go here, but you opened the door to it. So, you have a guy who paints shamdemic on his windows, and you have people that are still calling it a hoax. You have a large string of individuals who are freaking out in public places because they have to wear a mask, and they're seeing it as an infringement upon their liberty. and they are all using similar talking points. The person in who's doing it in Iowa and the person in Alabama and somewhere else are all saying the same things on the ground in a grocery store. The same words are coming out their mouth, which to me indicates that you have media and a concerted effort to put out a narrative around it being a hoax and not a real pandemic. I don't know that you can control for the idea that if you want to get good, truthful information out to the public, that you're also fighting now a competing narrative that's hurtful and damaging, and probably like we haven't seen it before.
This has been coming for a while. You know, if you're a conservative, you watch certain cable channels and you read certain newspapers, and if you're a liberal, you watch a completely different group. And if you like, from time to time, I'll watch both just to see what they're thinking, and it's completely different. I mean, it's like totally different set of facts even. So the commonality of who we are as American citizens has been shred a bit. Now, I would say, you know, there is this group of people that say the pandemic's not real, that it's a hoax, and then there's others that say we have to, you know, basically permanently shut down. We have to quarantine, and that's bad too, because the social costs of completely shutting down is horrible. It is horrific, and we're not factoring that in. Yes, you can reduce the infection rate if we all just basically don't live our lives, but the economic costs, the issues of the divide as it relates to income and education outcomes will only grow exponentially if we do that. And the suffering for millions of people has to be factored in as well. And so you have one set of people that are saying anybody that thinks that that you can have a strategy to open, you're a knuckle dragger, and another group of people that's saying, you know, Anthony Fauci's is, you know, some part of some vast conspiracy. It's getting a little weird. And it's a deadly disease, and a lot of people are suffering, and we should be called to, you know, to do better about this. We really should.
Well, it feels like a harsh criticism to make, but it isn't a time for sober, intellectual, authoritative, smart people right now. This isn't their time. So people with great credentials and longstanding careers in our biggest agencies and, you know, some of our biggest experts can watch their reputations be trashed in 30 seconds, right? If they say the wrong thing. And the wrong thing could be truthful and factual, but we're in a very political season right now.
And the experts have been WHO has made some some edicts about this that turned out to be incorrect. The CDC, I think, was slow to approve a test that had already been delivered by the WHO to the rest of the world. They wanted to do it their way. There's been mistakes along the way, and in this environment, mistakes create, you know, see, I told you, rather than saying, okay, let's learn from the mistakes and adapt
and move forward.
I mean, we've never had a case of self-imposed economic calamity because of a serious pandemic that is it's the great challenge of our time. And then on top of that, we have the racial strife of that was the catalyst was the George Floyd murder. On all of this going on at the same time, with an anxious population that's got a lot of time to watch it unfold from their homes. I mean, this is a powder keg right now for sure. So, I think it'd be the better thing to do is to say we don't know everything. Our bias ought to be to solve problems. Our leaders should be telling us the truth and giving us some hope that we're going to get through this. Chris, one thing I would say that is in the midst of all this, the one most exciting, uplifting thing that has happened in my opinion was SpaceX going to the space station and coming back. It's just unbelievable. That's America. No one would have expected a startup basically to be able to create the kind of technologies that they have to be able to deliver things into space at a low cost like that, and doing it where you're using reusable rockets and all this new innovations. That to me is what should define our country. That's what we need more of.
I had put out a tweet not too long ago where I said, I'm going to butcher it, but the traditional public education leaders and employees and boosters have spent a long number of years belittling and slandering private industry, the motives of business people in the business community, entrepreneurialism, even parents. And those are all the things that we need right now to meet the educational challenges that we have before us, which is weird because we've been beating them up so long that I don't even know that we have the muscles necessary to pull it all together. What are we going to do with entrepreneurialism right now in education? What are we going to do with private industry in education? What's the bigger thinking around that?
I think, well, first of all, we need to change rules and change laws. And the states that will promote innovation are the ones that will open up their systems. For example, ASU is building out a incredible repository of high quality content developed by people like Steven Spielberg that they're going to share through their distance learning platform. You could imagine that would be something that would turn on a whole generation of young people towards math and science. Whatever the subject is that they're using this dramatic, beautiful content to learn all sorts of things. Well, you can't do it because you have 50 states with 50 rules. Maybe what we need to do is to have reciprocity, so high quality content can be delivered to every child in the country, and somehow create a strategy where teachers can harness all this in their classroom, or if we're going to be learning at home, which I hope we will more as well as part of the learning experience, that it's not prohibited, that it's part of the experience. That requires changing, almost prehistoric laws and rules that prohibit that kind of thing. The unions won't like that, but parents will love it. Students will be driven towards it, and there's all sorts of ways to deliver this kind of content into the classroom that could be really meaningful. And the power of scale, is something that is like you can drive costs down so that it's not a threat to public education at all. The more people that use something of high quality in terms of learning or any service, as we see with these big tech behemoths, they're not winning the argument because they're monopolies that price their products high. They're winning the argument because they use their scale to drive costs to zero. And then their scale becomes the barrier of entry for other people. So there's all sorts of examples that could be brought to bear if we changed, if we change just course access to make it possible for someone in Minnesota to be able to get a high quality teacher's work on a particular subject from Florida.
That opens up, a question to me around the United States spends a lot of money on these things called colleges and universities. And when we're talking about K-12 education, it almost feels like the higher education leaders get to sit privately and watch us fight about K-12. What's the bigger role for junior colleges, or what we call community colleges, state colleges, and universities right now to earn their keep in terms of fixing our problems?
Well, starting with schools of education, to be able to train teachers, a degree in elementary school education or education in general ought to mean that you're prepared to go into the classroom with the skills and the grit and determination to be successful. And there are many teachers that are really successful at that. I'm not sure it's their school of education that the reason for their success is the school of education. So just revamping all of how we teach teachers to make them well-trained and developed in a way that will make them be successful, I think is one thing they could do. They've got their own challenges. Their business model is in many cases stressed beyond belief, because now we're reaching a point where you can't just keep raising tuition. You have to deliver higher quality experience. When 60% of full-time students graduate in our public universities with a 4-year degree in 6 years, that's not good. And they typically, whether they graduate or not, have significant recourse debt on their backs. So reforming in a serious way, making sure that there's access to a full-time student ought to be able to graduate. They're further advanced on the distance learning side of this. There's all sorts of innovations taking place, but the model itself, I think, needs to become more relevant to the world we're in right now.
That's what I was really thinking, is that they have, in a lot of ways, mastered so-called distance learning. Some of them, not all of them, but they have infrastructure. And I would imagine that, I think about the Twin Cities, the local school district, the St. Paul public schools and the Minneapolis public schools, right in the middle, have this mammoth operation that is the University of Minnesota, right in the city limits, right? And they could do a lot more to be relevant to the kids that are 2 miles away in the same city that they are in, and the school districts that are struggling right now without the infrastructure that they have.
Yeah, I mean, the objective, the aspiration ought to be that students graduate from high school, college, and or career ready, and that they have, if they're capable of taking college level work, they have access to it. So one of my favorite schools is a school that is affiliated with Florida Atlantic University, and their kids, they have students that are graduating from their high school and getting a college degree along with it. I mean, that kind of innovation, not every kid is going to be capable of taking college level work starting as a sophomore in high school, but the ones that should be able to do it. And that's why the college board, the AP classes, IB classes, these are important. And they can be embedded in all the learning that exists. And colleges and community colleges can play a really important role in that.
And I know we got to wrap soon. I had a bigger question around, let me just ask a part of it and we can see if we can wrap it quickly. First, I would just want to ask about the work that you all do for the Foundation for Excellence in Education, and what's your main focus right now? Like, what is the thing? What's your big bet? What are you pushing on? But embedded in that question, I was going to ask you, if we had more time, if you see a role for philanthropy right now we've talked about K-12 schools, we've talked about elected leaders, we've talked about parents, we've talked about the full community of people that could be helping right now. But if you had any thoughts around what philanthropy should be doing to calibrate their giving and to be thinking through their strategies, what would that be? Like, what would you say to them?
I think the question of equity is an important one that, if we get right, will be an incredibly positive contribution to restoring the resiliency, the nature of who we are as a country. So I would urge philanthropists to really focus on the equity issue. If you're a low-income family in this country, you don't get the same education. The funding levels may not be the same. The access to higher education may not be the same. Your zip code begins to determine your fate. And so my hope is that, as it relates to education, that philanthropists really focus on helping high-performing schools enter into the lives of, particularly of low-income Americans, because these gaps are going to grow through the pandemic. And this is to me, this is the great challenge of our time. And this is what we focus on at the foundation. We believe that we should have high, lofty expectations for every child. You can't excuse away why some kids can learn and some kids can't. Rather than say, it's not fair, to be able to hold people to account, you say, damn right, it's fair. It's the exact opposite. It's unjust to not hold people to account when particularly low-income kids of color, are the ones that are left behind. It's shameful. It's not American. And so our foundation, is focused on accountability, empowering parents with choices that the system otherwise wouldn't give them, having a focus on early childhood literacy so those gaps don't grow. And now recently we're trying to help states think through, how do you move to a mastery-based system, both in terms of accountability and allowing students to reach their God-given abilities, not to push them along if they haven't mastered the material, and not to hold.
Well, this is what I love so much about the Foundation for Excellence in Education, is that you guys stay focused, and that you stay focused on what matters, and you place your bets and place your focus on the long view, not just the short view. And, you know, in times like we're in right now, I think we need absolutely that type of leadership. It is amazing that I've talked to you now like 3 or 4 times, and I've gotten to like dig in on some of you. I'm still fascinated with your leadership profile. The optimism part, the long view part, it doesn't waver. You know, I saw you 10 years ago, and I saw you 2 years ago, and I was on the stage with you a year ago, and it's consistent. It just doesn't change. And I wish we had more of it. And I think that's absolutely what we should be doing, is looking for what can we do? What are the solutions? Let's stop talking about what we can't do anymore. So you're the leader in that. Thank you so much for coming on today, Governor Bush. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. Continued success with your great cause.
I appreciate it. And for the people who are watching and listening, you can find all the work that they do. If you go to the Foundation for Excellence in Education, you'll find all the work that they do. They have some really great news updates around important policy changes, important innovation that is taking place in states and districts. So please go check it out. This has been one of my favorite interviews with Jeb Bush, Governor Jeb Bush from Midland, Texas, but Florida for the many years since, and arguably like the kind of most accomplished governor ever when it comes to school reforms and what we should be doing for education. Took Florida from being, as I said at the top of the show, an educational laggard to being a national leader, and he did it by a very logical, well thought out and thoughtful set of educational interventions that could be done in any state and anywhere. Thank you, Governor Bush. Appreciate you.
Stay safe.